I noticed it on a Thursday. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moments that change everything. They don't arrive on dramatic days. They don't come with music or warning or a sky that looks different. They come on a Thursday, at 6:47 in the morning, in the break room of a company I was about to leave forever. She was standing by the window. That part wasn't unusual. Natalie was always somewhere near a window. She said the light helped her think, and I had learned, in 2 years of working under her, not to interrupt those moments. She was the CEO. She didn't explain herself. She didn't have to. But that morning, something was different. She had a coffee mug in both hands, not one hand the way she usually held it. Both hands, like she needed the warmth. Her shoulders were slightly lower than usual. Her jaw wasn't set. She was just standing there, soft in a way I had never been allowed to see. And she laughed. Not at me. I hadn't said anything. Something she was reading on her phone made her laugh. A quiet, private laugh that I was not meant to witness. A laugh that had nothing to do with board meetings or quarterly reviews or the particular brand of terrifying competence she wore every day like a second skin. I stood at the doorway for exactly 4 seconds before she heard me. When she looked up, the softness was gone. The jaw came back, the shoulders, the distance. "Good morning, Maya," she said, already turning toward the window again. "Good morning," I said, and I stood there, holding my empty mug, telling myself it meant nothing. I told myself that for the next 6 months. I'm still not sure I ever convinced myself I need to go back, because the story doesn't start on that Thursday. It starts 2 years before that morning, when I walked into the Glass and Steel building in Midtown Manhattan for the first time, in a blazer I'd bought specifically so I'd look like someone who belonged there, telling myself the whole elevator ride up that I was ready for this. I was 26. She was 34. She was already a legend in the industry, the kind of woman people described using words that would sound like compliments if they came a little less clipped. Driven. Exacting. Brilliant in a way that doesn't always leave room for warmth. I had read every interview she'd given. I had studied her company the way some people study scripture, not because I was trying to impress her, but because I genuinely believed in what they were building. Sustainability consulting for Fortune 500 companies. Making the case, in dollars and data, that the right thing and the profitable thing could be the same thing. It was her idea, her vision, her decade of relentless work. I wanted to be part of that. What I didn't expect was her. My first week, I made a mistake in a client report. Not a small one. A conversion error that changed the projected numbers by a margin that mattered. I caught it myself at 11 o'clock at night, fixed it, sent the corrected version, and came in the next morning braced for the conversation I knew was coming. She called me into her office at 8. I sat across from her desk, the enormous, impeccably organized desk, with one orchid plant in the corner that she watered herself every Monday morning. And I waited for whatever version of professional devastation she'd prepared. Instead, she said, "You caught it, before anyone else did." "How?" I blinked. I went back through the raw data. Something felt off. She looked at me for a long moment. The kind of look that doesn't feel like evaluation. It feels like reading. Then she said, "Good instinct," and dismissed me. That was it. I walked back to my desk with my heart pounding and spent the rest of the day trying to understand why that felt more significant than a compliment from anyone else had ever felt. Over the next 2 years, we built something that I learned to call a working relationship, because I didn't have another name for it that felt safe. She was precise. I was thorough. She pushed deadlines until they broke. I caught what fell through the cracks. She didn't give praise easily, but when she did, she gave it directly and without decoration, and somehow that made it feel more real than 1,000 empty compliments from anyone else. We had a rhythm. We had, and I am only able to say this now, from the other side of everything that happened, A language. I knew when she needed the room cleared before a call. I knew that the second coffee of the day meant a hard conversation was coming. I knew the particular quality of silence that meant she was actually thinking, versus the silence that meant she was already finished with whatever you'd said. She knew that I worked better with noise in the background. She knew I would stay late without being asked and that I needed to be sent home or I'd forget to leave. She knew, though she never said it, that I'd been through something difficult the year before I joined the company, and she gave me room to be somewhere in the middle of it without asking what it was. I told myself this was what it meant to work closely with someone, to be trusted, to trust. I told myself the way I looked for her face when I walked into a room was professional attentiveness. I told myself a lot of things. And then came the Thursday in the break room, and the laugh, and the mug held in both hands, and 4 seconds of her being soft in a world that had never let me see her that way before. And I couldn't unknow it. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. I went back to my desk. I drank my coffee. I attended 3 meetings, responded to 42 emails, and reviewed a draft proposal for a client in Austin. I did everything that Thursday required of me. But something had moved inside me, and I couldn't find where to put it back. The following weeks were strange. Not dramatically strange, quietly strange. The kind of strange that lives in the margins of ordinary days, and only reveals itself when you're lying in bed at midnight, staring at the ceiling, asking yourself why you're not asleep yet. I started noticing things I'd always seen, but never registered. The way she moved through a room, not quickly, not slowly, but with a kind of deliberate calm that made you feel like whatever she was walking toward was exactly where things were supposed to happen. I'd been watching her move through rooms for 2 years, and somehow I was only now seeing it. The way she talked about the work. Not with the detached efficiency she used in presentations, but in the smaller moments, in the elevator, at the end of a long day, when the performance had come down a little, with something underneath the words that sounded like it mattered to her. Actually mattered. Like she'd built this not just because she was good at it, but because she believed in it. The way she said my name. That one I couldn't rationalize for long. She said everyone's name the same way. Cleanly, without affectation. But there was a particular moment, a Tuesday afternoon, where she called me into a hallway conversation about a client issue and she said Maya. And something in the way she said it made me stop walking for exactly 1 step before I caught myself. Like it was different. Like she knew something about the word that other people didn't. I went home that night and sat on my kitchen floor, not the couch, the floor, with my back against the cabinet. And I had a very direct conversation with myself. This is Natalie Voss. Your boss. Your CEO. A woman you have worked for and admired and, yes, liked enormously for 2 years. This is a professional relationship that you have respected and that has been good for your career and your life. This is not a place for whatever this is that you're doing right now on your kitchen floor at 9:30 on a Tuesday. I gave myself the whole speech, and then I went to bed and dreamed about the orchid on her desk. Not about her, just the orchid. The way she watered it herself every Monday morning with a small glass pitcher she kept in the bottom drawer. The care in it, the consistency, the fact that in an office full of people who would have been delighted to take that task off her hands, she did it herself. I woke up at 3 in the morning knowing something I hadn't known when I'd gone to sleep. I didn't name it yet. I wasn't ready for the name, but I knew the shape of it. And I knew, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that I was in trouble. The smart thing, the only thing that made sense, was distance. Gentle, professional, invisible distance. No avoidance, no change in behavior. Just the management of something that could not be allowed to grow. I was very good at the plan for about 3 weeks, and then she stayed late on a Friday. Everyone had gone home. I was the last one at my desk, the way I always was, working through a model that didn't quite balance. The office was that specific kind of quiet that only exists after 7 on a Friday. The air conditioning hums differently, the building breathes differently, the city outside sounds like it's just going on without you. She came out of her office with her jacket in her hand and her bag over her shoulder, and she stopped when she saw me. "You're still here," she said. "Model's off," I said. "I'll figure it out." She set her jacket down on the chair beside my desk. She sat on the edge of it, not in it, on the arm, sideways, the way you'd sit if you were just passing through. She stayed for 40 minutes. We talked about the model, and then about the client, and then about something I'd read that week that had nothing to do with work. And she told me about a conference she'd attended years ago where someone had said something that she'd never been able to shake, and I told her something I hadn't told anyone at work, something small and personal. And she listened the way she always listened, like what you said was worth hearing. When she finally left, she picked up her jacket and her bag and she said goodnight, and I watched her walk toward the elevator. And when the doors closed, I sat there in the empty office for a long time without moving. My hands were in my lap. I was warm everywhere, and I thought, I am not managing this. I am not managing this at all. I put in my notice 3 weeks later. I want to be honest about that. I don't want to make it sound noble or obvious. It was neither. It was the most confusing professional decision I'd ever made, and I made it at 6 a.m, sitting on my bed in yesterday's clothes, after a night where I'd spent more time thinking about a Friday conversation than I'd spent sleeping. I had an offer from another firm. I'd been approached months before and hadn't taken it seriously until suddenly I needed a reason to go that had nothing to do with what I was feeling. I took the offer. I drafted the letter. I submitted it to HR without telling her first, which was a breach of the unspoken protocol we'd built. And I knew it. And I did it anyway, because I was afraid that if I sat across from her desk and told her I was leaving, she would look at me in that particular way she had. The reading look. The look that found what you weren't saying. And she would know. She called me into her office an hour after HR informed her. She was standing when I came in, not at her desk, near the window. "You're leaving," she said. "I am." "When did you decide?" "Recently." A pause. She turned from the window slightly but not fully. "The offer from Meridian?" I didn't ask how she knew. Of course she knew. "Yes." Another pause. The kind that has texture to it. "It's a good firm," she said. And then quieter. "It's not what you'd be doing here." "I know." She nodded once, turned back to the window. "Okay," she said. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I walked back to my desk and I sat down and I thought, good. This is the right thing. Clean. Professional. You can leave without carrying this, and it will fade the way these things fade, and none of it will have mattered. My last 2 weeks were precise and thorough, and I transitioned everything perfectly, because that was what I could control, and I controlled it completely. On my last day, people brought a cake. There were speeches. Someone made a card that everyone had signed. It was warm and kind, and exactly what you'd want a goodbye to look like. Natalie came out of her office for exactly 20 minutes. She shook hands. She said the right things. She smiled. The public smile. The one that worked beautifully but never quite reached the same place as the private one I'd seen in the break room that Thursday morning. When people drifted back to their desks, she found me at mine one last time. She put a small card on the desk. Not in an envelope. Just a card. She said, "You were excellent. I hope you know that." And then she left the office entirely. Not a goodbye, "I'll see you later." She left. I picked up the card. Inside, in her handwriting, clean, upright, the handwriting of someone who was taught to write carefully, it said, "The next place is lucky to have you. Don't let them underuse you. Nothing else. No signature." She didn't need one. I put the card in my bag. I took my things. I said goodbye to the people who were left. I took the elevator down. In the lobby, before I pushed through the glass doors into the October air. I stopped. I stood there for a moment with the card against my palm through the fabric of my bag. Then I pushed through the doors. I told myself, it's done. It's over. You did the right thing. I told myself that for 8 months. I told myself that right up until the morning I ran into her at the farmer's market in Brooklyn, 40 feet from a bread stand, in the particular golden light of a Saturday in June. And she turned around and saw me before I could decide whether to walk in the other direction. And everything I'd spent 8 months carefully managing came apart in about 4 seconds. Because she looked surprised. And then she looked something else. Something I didn't have a clean professional name for. And I thought, oh no. And I thought, oh. But before we go any further, if you've made it this far, you already know what I'm talking about. That feeling of leaving something because you're afraid of what it might cost you to stay. Click the like button right now. It takes 1 second and it tells me this kind of story is worth making more of. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so YouTube lets you know when the next story drops. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever left something, a job, a friendship, a place, because staying felt too dangerous? Not because you wanted to go, but because you were afraid of what you'd feel if you didn't? Tell me. I read every single one. And tell me what city you're watching from. I'll heart every comment. Now, back to the farmer's market. We got coffee. I don't entirely know how it happened. One moment we were standing 40 feet from a bread stand, and then we were sitting at a small table outside a coffee shop 3 blocks away, with paper cups, and the noise of a Brooklyn Saturday all around us. And I was trying very hard to seem like someone for whom this was normal. She looked different outside the office. Or maybe she looked the same, and the office had been the thing that was different. She was wearing a light linen shirt, pale blue, slightly wrinkled from the market, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Her hair was down. I had seen her with her hair down exactly once before, during a late night that stretched past midnight during a crisis quarter, and I had treated the image carefully ever since, like something that needed to be filed in the right place. We talked around the edges for a while, the way you do when you haven't seen someone in 8 months, and you're both remembering exactly what you were to each other, and neither of you has decided yet what you are now. She asked about Meridian. I told her honestly that it was good. Different, smaller, less of what I'd been doing, but good. She listened without the energy of someone waiting to speak. She asked one careful follow-up question that landed exactly on the thing I hadn't finished saying. I remembered that about her. The follow-up questions that landed exactly where the sentence was still going. Are you happy there? She asked. It was such a direct question. She was always direct. I'd forgotten how much I liked it. I'm okay, I said. She nodded. Didn't push. Then, after a moment, looking at her cup, I thought about calling. I went very still. When you left, she said. I thought about it. Why didn't you? My voice was even. I was proud of it. She looked up. The reading look. The one that found things. Because I wasn't sure it would have been entirely professional. The word landed slowly. I let it land. Natalie, I said. And then I stopped, because I didn't know what came after it. She waited. She was so good at waiting, at holding space for the thing that needed time to arrive. I looked at the table. I looked at my cup. I looked at the people walking past us on the sidewalk, living their ordinary Saturday lives, going somewhere uncomplicated. And then I looked at her, and I stopped trying to manage it. I left because I was scared, I said, not because of the job. The silence that followed had a specific quality. Not empty, not waiting, present, like something was happening in it. I know, she said. 2 words. She said it quietly, and she said it simply, and she said it like she'd known for a while, and had been carrying it in a particular place, somewhere she'd decided not to look at too often. You knew, I had a feeling. A pause. I wasn't certain. And now? She smiled then. Not the public smile. Not the board meeting smile. The private one. The one I'd seen once, for 4 seconds, on a Thursday morning, through a break room doorway. Now I'm certain, she said. I felt something shift, not dramatically, not the way it happens in films where the music swells and the world slows down. It shifted the way the light shifts in late afternoon, when you've been inside all day, and you step out and realize the whole angle of everything has changed, and you'd been missing it without knowing. I don't know what this is, I said honestly. Neither do I, she said, just as honestly. That doesn't scare you? She considered it. Really considered it. She took everything seriously, including questions. It does, she said. It just doesn't scare me more than the alternative. I thought about 8 months of telling myself I'd done the right thing. I thought about the card. Don't let them underuse you. I thought about how I'd understood that sentence perfectly, and had also understood, somewhere underneath it, that she wasn't only talking about Meridian. I've been thinking about something, I said. Tell me. I thought the hardest part was leaving. I was wrong. The hardest part was that leaving didn't change anything. I kept feeling it from somewhere else. She was quiet for a moment. Same, she said. The word was smaller than anything she'd said all morning, precise in the way only honest things are. I looked at her across the small table in the June light, with the noise of Brooklyn and 2 paper cups between us, and I let myself feel everything I'd been filing away in careful places for almost 3 years. It was a lot. It was more than I'd known how to carry, which was why I'd kept pretending the weight wasn't there. I don't know what we do with this, I said. Neither do I, she said again, and then she reached across the table and she put her hand over mine. Not romantically, not in the film version of the gesture, just her hand over mine. Warm, still, like something that had been traveling a long distance and had finally, quietly, arrived. But I think, she said, we could probably figure it out. I turned my hand over, just slightly. Enough. Yeah, I said. I think we could. It was Diane who figured it out first. Diane, who had been my closest friend since college, who had heard me say Natalie's name in approximately 40 different registers over the past 3 years, without ever once telling me what she suspected. Diane, who had met Natalie exactly once, at a company event she'd attended as my +1, and had spent the entire car ride home asking me questions that I had answered with a performance of complete obliviousness. I called her the evening after the farmer's market. I have to tell you something, I said. You ran into her, she said immediately. How? Maya, you've been a little obvious. I sat with that for a moment. How obvious? The night you called me from your kitchen floor. I was just... You described the orchid on her desk for 11 minutes. I closed my eyes. Okay, I said. I told her everything. About the coffee. About the table. About the 2 words. Same. And the hand over mine. And what it felt like when something that has been traveling a long distance finally arrives. Diane was quiet through most of it. She let me go. She was good at that. At knowing when the story needed to be told out loud before it was real. When I finished, she said, Are you scared? Yes, I said. Of her? No. Of myself. Of being wrong about what I felt. Of it being more complicated than a farmer's market in June makes it look. It will be complicated, she said. I know. And you're going to do it anyway. It wasn't really a question. Yeah, I said. I think I am. She exhaled. Good. What I didn't know, until Natalie told me weeks later, was that she'd been in her own version of the same place. She was sure of what she felt. She was not sure what to do with it. She'd spent 8 months telling herself my leaving had been clean, and clean was better. For me, for her, for whatever professional thing we'd built that she hadn't wanted to damage. She'd convinced herself, fairly successfully, that it was over. Then she'd turned around at a farmer's market, and I'd been 40 feet away in the June light, and the whole careful structure of convinced had collapsed immediately. She told me this in her apartment, 2 weeks later, standing in her kitchen while I was sitting on the counter the way she'd told me I was not supposed to be sitting on the counter. How immediately? I asked. She looked at me with the precision she brought to everything. Before I'd finished turning around, I stayed on the counter. She stayed standing in front of me. And the thing is, she'd always been the certain one, the resolved one, the one who had the words before I did, who held space for whatever I needed time to reach. I'd always thought of her as the one who knew. And here was what I didn't expect. She was the one who'd needed the most time. She was the one who'd been circling this from the outside, managing it, keeping the professional distance, telling herself the story of what couldn't be, right up until June, and a farmer's market, and a few seconds of not being able to maintain the story anymore. She was the strong one who'd been hiding, and I had been the one who didn't know what she felt, who'd run, who'd filed things in careful places, who'd spent 8 months being sure that leaving was the right thing, who had somehow ended up the one sitting on the counter, 2 weeks later, in no particular hurry to be anywhere else. We'd both been wrong about who was stronger. We'd both been wrong about who needed to be saved. She reached over and straightened the hem of my sleeve. Just a small gesture, the kind that meant nothing from the outside, the kind that meant everything from the inside. And I thought about the orchid in the bottom drawer, and the card, and the Friday nights, and the reading look, and the laugh by the window that I was not meant to witness. "So," she said. "So," I said. "This is happening." "This is happening," I said. Not a question from either of us. The city kept going outside the window. The kitchen was quiet, the way it's quiet when something has finally been named, and the name is right, and you both know it, and there's nothing left to work around. I had spent 3 years thinking that what I felt was something I needed to manage. It turned out what I actually needed to do was stop being afraid of it long enough to let it be what it was. Something real, something mine, and hers, and entirely, unexpectedly, ours. They say the bravest thing you can do is admit what you feel before you know what it will cost you. I'm not sure I was that brave. I think I was terrified most of the way through. But somewhere between a Thursday break room and a Saturday farmer's market, between a card that said "Don't let them underuse you" and a kitchen counter I wasn't supposed to be sitting on, somewhere in all of that, I stopped running toward the version of things that felt safe, and I started running toward what was true. If this story landed somewhere real for you, write "found" in the comments. That's how I know you made it all the way to the end with me. And if you want to stay in this world a little longer, the next story is on your screen right now. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.